Hi, my name is Helen McKick and I'm here at Sewing Street to give you a lovely free product. So basically I was sitting at home and lots of people have been contacting me saying that they suddenly realised they don't have a hobby and they know that I'm an embroiderer and could I do something about that, show them some skills. So I contacted Sewing Street and decided to send out a free design for you. So you'll be able to download that design free of charge through the social media for Sewing Street, and you'll see a link below that should be appearing soon, and be able to click onto that. It will take you through to download the PDF free of charge, and it's got all the information, step-by-step diagrams, and also a design template. And the design that I've created is the piece that you can see here. So I know that we've all been really stressed at the moment. We're all kind of working to pull together through kind of a strange set of circumstances. But I've seen lots of examples of amazing acts of kindness and community, and I just really wanted to celebrate that and the fact that yes, it's stressful, but we're doing amazing things as well. So I've called it Hope Trinity, and we see it just reflects the hope, the kindness and the community, and the fact that I would really like to see more examples in the news of the fact that we're caremongers, not scaremongers. So yes, so basically what I thought we could do is that it would be a great way of showing you some free designs and also some stitches that are for basic stitches. So you could be a complete newbie, you don't have to have picked up a needle before. I'll talk you through it today, and then that means that you could use those skills to practice on this piece or to just design your own piece or see some other pieces that you've had in mind that you wanted to have a go at. It could be simple lettering or motifs that you'd like to do. So let's get started. So the PDF that you'll download has got a full instruction booklet. It's got an introduction. So you can see we've got the front page, just a list of all the things that you'll need, and you'll be able to purchase those as well from Sewing Street if you wanted them. And so the threads, the needles, the embroidery hoop, the scissors, and if you want to transfer with a water erasable pen, you can use that as well. So the design stitch plan with colour plan there, some stitch diagrams, and then the order of work. So I've given you really clearly put out in instruction and also visuals of the order of work that I created for you. So that's all there online to be able to download free of charge. So how do we actually get the piece onto the fabric? Well, you've got a design template in the back of here. So if I just show you that piece. So the design template looks like this. If you're sitting at home, you could put that very simply, stick it with sellotape to your window, and then sellotape your fabric over the top. It could be anything. I've used calico, which is just a really cheap, easy to get hold of base fabric. Most people have got some of this. You could use cotton, you could use an old sheet, a pillowcase, you could use an old shirt, anything you want. And basically you just need to be able to put it over. It needs to be a thinnish fabric. Sellotape that over the top in your window, and then you'll be able to see that pattern shining through, and then you can trace it on. I used a water erasable pen, and it's just the lovely thing about a water erasable pen is that you just use it like a normal marker. You can see it draws on quite easily, and don't worry about this. You might think, oh, she's ruining her artwork. It's water erasable, as the name suggests. So if at the end, once you've stitched, you have any lines that you haven't managed to cover properly, or you're worried about the way it looks, or you think, oh, actually I'd rather not have the outline on there or the lettering, I'd just rather have the Trinity sign in the middle, that's absolutely fine. All you need to do is the threads are colour fast, so it means that the colour won't run. So once you finish your stitching, take it out of your hoop and then just immerse it in clean cold water, and then lay it flat onto the sideboard on a nice clean towel and let it dry. And those marks, those design marks will have disappeared. So that's a really easy way to transfer on, which has absolutely no pressure, no repercussions for things going wrong. So as a beginner, it's a really lovely way of starting. So once you've transferred on, you don't have to work in a hoop, but actually it's much easier to get a good finished result. So because it keeps the fabric nice and taut, and it also means if you've got a hoop that attaches to something like this one, you can see this one has the stalk that attaches to a barrel clamp to the table, then it means that you can actually just use both hands as well. So rather than having to hold the frame all the time, you can actually just get on with the stitching. You've got two hands to play with. So it's just much easier. So we've got 5 stitches that I'm going to introduce you to. So the first one I'm going to show you is chain stitch. So let me just find a needle. I've got them hanging all over the place here. So threading the needle, I've used, with these threads, I've used all 6 strands. So that you get a lovely thick coverage and a really bold finish. But if you find that you've got very sore hands or arthritis, or you struggle with that, then you'd maybe want to use slightly less and just a bit more stitching to do the coverage. Take the threads into the cushiony bit of your fingers and then take the eye of the needle to the thread. In theory, there's nowhere for it to go but through the hole, okay? I say in theory, it's a disclaimer, so just in case there's every now and again it might not work. Right, so with the chain stitch, you're going to come up and go down into as near to the same hole as possible. So you can see that. And then we pull, but you can see I'm holding it so it creates a loop. You travel forward, coming up in the loop, and then you pull. Now, you want to try and control the amount of tension you put this loop under, because if you pull really tightly, the 2 sides will collapse in. What we want is to have a chain shape, so without the 2 sides collapsing like that. So that is what we're looking for. So to continue with this, all you need to do is go down within the top end of that loop, pull. That gives you the loop, travel a short distance, coming up in the loop and pull. And you can see that that gives you another chain link. They all interlink like this. You continue quite simply and pull. Once you've got to the end of your piece, this particular section, you'll go down just on the outside of that chain and hold it down. And you can see that's nice and secure. Now, if you imagine I was doing the full row, basically I've still got this bit of band that hasn't been filled in. So what I'd want to do is to start another length of thread at the same end as I started before, so all the chains are facing the same direction. And I'm simply going to do that again. And you do as many rows sitting next to each other as you'd like. And you're just trying to regulate the length of stitch and the tension to which you're pulling so that they have a similarity, so that there's not, you know, some tiny ones and then some really short ones and big ones next to each other. Okay, so you continue in that manner until that's all done. So I'm just going to park this thread up out of the way because I've finished with that one. So that is chain stitch. So all of the third band from the outside edge, so if the outer edge is the first band, this is the third band, that's the green, that's all worked in chain stitch on mine. So hopefully that will be a nice straightforward way of starting. So the next stitch I'm going to show you is back stitch. And this pretty much does what it says on the tin. You're going to travel forward for the first stitch. And I'm not making these stitches too short. Basically, they're about 4 to 5 millimeters in length. So travel forward. And then I'm going to come up away from that stitch at about the same distance and travel backwards, hence the name back stitch. And I want to travel and go down into the same hole as the end of the previous stitch. And then travel forward, come up and go down into the same hole of the end of the previous stitch. And you can see it will cover in the distance quite easily and quite swiftly. Now again, by the time you've got to the end of this band, I'm not going to do the whole thing because we'll be here forever. What we're going to do is we want to fill in because we've still got this full width that isn't completed. So basically what I'd do is I'd stitch, and with this stitch you can go in either direction because it doesn't point one way or another. I'd come at the halfway point and I'd simply go down at the halfway point, making sure that my stitches sit next to each other. And it looks a little bit like bricks in a wall. By the time that you've done the whole area, it actually fills in really effectively. So obviously at the start you'll end up with a little half stitch this time. And the third row simply goes back to the same alignment as the first row because it's at the halfway point of the second. So hopefully that should all make sense. And you can see that it builds in quite rapidly. So if I just bring that up out of the way, and what I'm going to do is I'm just going to bring my other sample across so that you can just have a really good close look at the way those 2 stitches look so far. So you can see we've got the chain stitch was the first stitch I showed you, so that's got a lovely texture to it, and I got 4 rows within that band. If yours take more rows or less rows, that's absolutely fine. It depends on the tension to which you're pulling them and also the length of the stitch. So that's absolutely fine. Each person's slightly different with that. It's a bit like handwriting in that sense. So the A, B and C are exactly the same, but your slant or your angle or the height changes the way it looks. But it's still the same thing. And then you can see here the back stitch, and you can see it creates that lovely texture when you've staggered the rows with each other, so when you alternate them so they look like little bricks. So that's a really lovely finish and really works in quite quickly. Now we've got another stitch to show you, which is fly stitch, which I'm just going to thread up again for you. Get rid of this fuzzy end. When you're threading up, it's always worth trimming the end of the thread so that you know that you've got all the threads on the same level. Makes it much easier to thread up. So what we're going to do is I'm going to come up in the one point, I'm going to travel down to the other side, and sometimes people find it helpful to draw in an extra line on this because we're going to be putting a holding stitch down the centre of this shape. So you can put a central line down this shape with your pencil, your water erasable pen, whatever your preference is for drawing on with. And then what we'll do is we'll come down. So if you imagine it like a triangle, so I've got one point and another point, I need to create the tip of the triangle. So I come up on that central line and I go down on the outside. So then I'll do that again. I travel a short distance away because I want these stitches to sit next to each other. So I'm travelling down very slightly. Go down below the opposite side. And then I'll come up in the middle, in the end of the holding stitch that we did before. Pull. And put my new holding stitch in. Now if your holding stitch is too long, you'll end up with a gap in between your stitches, so you just want it to do a tiny little holding stitch so that the gaps don't appear. So I'll show you that once more. Okay. And you can see with this end, I want to be able to fill this in. So all I'm going to do is, now I've set my angle up, I'm just going to do mini ones that are going to travel in on this edge. So you'll just get smaller and smaller. So all I'm going to do is, the angle will end up flattening slightly in that end, but that's absolutely fine because we just want to create a nice neat bar looking end to this piece. And you can see it's not a belaboured process. Because we're working with quite a thick thread, we're working with quite a lot of this thread, it means that we can cover the fabric quite quickly. And you can see I've just got one little gap there, so all I'm going to do is put a little straight stitch in down that central line to fill. Okay, so once you've done that, you just continue with your normal fly stitch down the side until you've got to the end. Now, if I actually hop along, let's pretend I've filled all the way down to here. Because the band has got square ends, you'll see that they'll end up, once you've done your fly stitch all the way down here, you'll end up with little gaps at the side. Now we don't want to leave it like that, so all we need to do is to do some little straight stitches on the diagonal angle that mirrors the side that you're on, and they just get smaller and smaller to fill in the shape. Okay, and then you'll do the opposite in the other direction, the other side. Okay, so that's fly stitch. So I'm just going to bring that thread up out of the way. So we've already done chain stitch, back stitch, fly stitch, and if I just show you again on the main piece, the fly stitch, you can see the lovely finish. You'll get that lovely central vein line down the middle of the band. So it gives you a really, really lovely effect that's quite different to all the other stitches. So you can see each of them are quite different to the other. So this one's quite often used down the middle of leaves or feathers. So it really creates that lovely finish down the middle with the angle and then the central holding stitch. So the last stitch that I'm going to show you on the bands on the rainbow is a satin stitch. Now there's two ways of doing this. Traditionally, we used to put a split stitch edge in first. And the reason why you generally want to do that is because it helps you to get a lovely neat edge, a crisp finish on your satin stitch so that it all finishes at the same point. So I know some people don't put the split stitch in, so I'm going to show you both ways and then you can make your own mind up to whether you prefer to have the split stitch. Personally, I do prefer the split stitch. I think it has a very good purpose for it, so I'll show you the split stitch version. So I'm going to give you the split stitch in a contrast colour. So I'm just putting it in blue. And this is the only bit of the design that if you're going to put it in, I haven't used 6 strands. If you were going to do it, I would just use 3. So you can separate out the strands. So cut it to fingertip to elbow length and then just take 3 threads out, put them back together again and then into your needle to use as normal. So split stitch, again, exactly as it sounds on the tin. All you're going to do is put a stitch in, come up at the halfway point and split that stitch. Travel forward, split that stitch from behind and travel forward. So what you do is you'd put a little bordered edge on the split stitch onto this band before you do your satin stitch. It will slightly raise up the level of the embroidery off the face of the fabric, and it will also, as I say, help you to get that nice neat edge that's so desirable. And I'm just going to show you quickly the other side going in as well. You don't want to go too long with your split stitches because they then aren't that secure. So if you try and maintain a nice short length with those, so about kind of 3mm I'd say would be a good size to use for this technique, for this particular design. Now, we're going to go back to using all 6 strands. And then what we're going to do is we're going to come up on the outside of the split stitch and then we're going to travel across at 45 degrees, which is actually the shape of the end of the bar anyway, and go down on the outside of the split stitch. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come up on the forward edge and go down just on the outside on the edge that's furthest back. So come up on the leading edge and go down on the edge that's furthest back. You want to try and maintain your angle so it's 45 degrees as the shape travels round. So if I just get your stitch plan out a second, you can see on the design, on the stitch plan, it actually has a guide to the angles drawn on. So you can see that the 45 degree shape travels with that curve. So it's 45 degrees to the shape, not to the fabric. Okay, so if it helps you, again, you can use your pen and you can draw those angles on as a guide just to help you to kind of find your way around that piece. That's absolutely fine. You're going to cover it in, so it doesn't really matter. So as I say, the point of the split stitch is just to really help you get that crisp finish. You can, of course, if I just come past that, you can, of course, do it without. I know that commonly people quite often do it without. It is quicker, but it doesn't necessarily give you a smoother finish. because you see more of a jagged edge. Okay, so it's slightly flatter to the fabric because it's not raised up with the split stitch, and it's harder to get such a neat edge. So at the end of the day, that is completely your call. There's no, I'm not going to stand here and say there's a right and wrong to that. It just depends on what your purpose is and what you prefer. So just trapped my needle on there, so let's put it off. So that's your choice. As I say, if you want to do the split stitch first, it will help you to get that nice neat edge, but sometimes people want to just go for the speed, so that's completely fine. It's up to you. Right, so that's all of the rainbow bars, so the 3 rainbows you know how to create now, and I'm just going to cut the fluff off the end of my black thread. So the last stitch to show you is actually stem stitch. And stem stitch is a really lovely versatile stitch. So basically it's quite often used for edgings, it's quite often used for lettering, so we're going to use it for those purposes in this design. But you can also, if you wanted to fill in one of the bars, if you didn't like one of these stitches and wanted an alternative, you could use rows of stem stitch to do that. So it would still work perfectly well to do that, and you'll get a lovely texture to there as well. So all we're going to do is we're going to travel forward. We're going to pull our loop to the outside edge of the curve, come up at the halfway point on the line and pull. Travel forward, come up the halfway point, which is approximately the end of this previous stitch, and pull. Now, the longer you get with the stitch, the flatter it's going to look. So the shorter the stitch and the thicker the thread, the more curvaceous and S-like this looks, the more rope-like it appears. So, as I say, just keep an eye on the length of the stitch that you're putting in. So it just will help with the finish. It will just get, you've got plenty of thread, I'm sure, at home. If you practice it just on your piece, you can see how different it looks when you do longer stitches to if you do shorter stitches. You'll get a far more curvaceous roll on that, which is quite pleasing. It's the whole point of stem stitch. And for all the lettering, you can just work round, and it's really important. If I just hop across, obviously you wouldn't do this on your actual piece, you'd be starting and stopping your threads, which I'll show you in a second. I'm just hopping across to the O of hope just to show you how important it is to come up on the outside edge of the curve. So where you're approaching curves, make sure that your stitches are nice and small, so you can see how small that stitch is. It's about 2 to 3 mil. Come up at the halfway point, and by coming up at the halfway point, this thread will hold this into a curve, so it holds it to the outside edge of the curve, whereas if I was coming up with my loop on the inside edge, we'd end up with a series of angles on the inside of the O, so it wouldn't be as pleasing with the finish. So as I say, don't race your way through this lettering particularly, because you want it to look nice and neat. So the smaller the stitches, the neater your finish will look. So if you're going to race through any of the stem stitch, then make that the outer edge because it's less curvaceous. Okay, so hopefully that makes perfect sense. And then I think the last thing to do is to just explain to you how you start and stop your thread, because I know that some of you might like to put knots on the back. That's absolutely fine for a beginner, but if you want to see the technical way of starting and stopping threads nice and neatly, it's really straightforward. Knots can undo themselves, which is why we don't tend to use it. Plus it creates bulk. So what we'll do is we'll just simply get a thread, thread it up as usual. You do put a knot into it, but it's not going to stay. It doesn't matter where I start and stop, so I'm just going to pop it into that area that I know I'm going to cover up. This is called the waist knot technique. So we've got the knot on the top, and I'm in an area that I know I'm going to cover up. And I know all these bands are completely covered, but it could be on a line. So you could, if you're on the outside edge, you could start on that outer edge line or on the letters that you know you're going to conceal. Come up with your needle, do 2 tiny stitches, nice and small and tight, on or next to each other in that area you know you're going to cover. Bring your needle up ready to stitch, and then use the thread of the tail of the knot to lift it up and snip it off so that there's no tuft sticking out of the fabric. These are nice and secure, and they'll become more secure as you stitch over it with your fly stitch in this case. Okay, now let's say I've done my fly stitch. I'm just going to pop one of those in so you can see how you transition from stitching to ending a thread. So I know I've got to the end of the bar or the end of my thread and I need to cast off. So come up in an area or on a line that you know you need to cover again. 2 tiny stitches on or next to each other. This should be starting to feel familiar by now. Nice and small and tight. Bring your needle up, pull it taut and snip it off. So those are literally all of the stitches and all of the skills that I used to create the piece that you see in front of you. And I really hope that it gives some of you a new insight into a hobby, even if you decide that you've just enjoyed watching the video. But if you really fancy having a go, you can have all the threads from Sewing Street. There is a link that's going to appear below, so you can click on it. Will take you straight through to the correct part of the website if you want any or all of those pieces that you can buy. The PDF is there to download free of charge, and apart from that, just enjoy it. I really hope that you enjoy your new skills, make the most of the time that you might have unexpectedly sitting at home, and be kind to yourself. This is the kind of thing that you can put it on a garment, put it in your window, just enjoy it. So stay safe, be happy, and I'll see you soon. Thank you.